webcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome everybody to our webinar today, using assessment reports to spark change and opportunity. My name is Amber Malinowski and I'm the Director of Interactive Content here at Weave. I'm going to do just a really brief introduction in case some of you haven't attended one of our webinars before. I want to talk just a little bit about the GoToWebinar panel to make sure that you get the most out of our webinar today. And then I'll also be introducing our speaker, Dr. Catherine Wehlburg. And during the session, there will be a poll so that we can get to know you a little bit better and interact with you. And then there will also be a survey at the end. And we are going to try and leave some time for question and answers. So what I wanted to show you is on the GoToWebinar panel, there should be a little area where you can ask questions. There's a chat area and there's a question area. You can ask your questions in there, and those can be about the presentation. They can be about if you're having trouble with anything, sound, anything like that, I can help you with that as well. And then when we get to the end of the presentation, I will have those questions up on a screen so that we can all see them, and we will be able to ask our presenter those questions. Again, there will be a survey at the end. We really appreciate your feedback on that survey. It helps us shape our webinar series. Also, if you happen to be curious about Weave, I'll give just a really quick sentence summary about that, and then I can tell you how to get more information about that as well. So without further ado, let me introduce our presenter today. Dr. Catherine Wehlburg is the Associate Provost for Institutional Effectiveness at Texas Christian University. She served as faculty in psychology and educational psychology for more than 20 years, including being department chair. Dr. Wehlburg has been an outside evaluator both with the Higher Learning Commission and with the Southern Association of Colleges and Schools. She's been involved as an author and editor on numerous publications, more than I was able to fit into my introduction here, and she's also a very well-known presenter. She's done several webinars for Weave. I met her about 7 years ago at a conference, and I always enjoy listening to her and speaking with her. She's a really positive personality and a very practical approach to this work. I always feel excited after listening to her speak. So, Catherine, we're really grateful that you're here to share your expertise with us today.
Well, thank you, Amber, and thank you for inviting me, and thank you for that introduction, and thank you to Weave for hosting these wonderful webinar opportunities for us to talk about what we do and learn from each other. I think that's really one of the values that we have in higher education, but in the assessment field as well, is that we do have these opportunities to talk to each other and share and commiserate sometimes, but also to really look at what is going and what's working and all of that. So thank you. I hope that all of you, as you're listening to this, at the end of this, will take something positive from what we do. As you all are very well aware, higher education and higher education assessment have not exactly gotten the best press in the last several months, and I think that that has caused a lot of us to talk differently about how we discuss what we do and how we do it and why we do it. And I think we're going to continue to have those conversations in the future, which certainly will strengthen us as a field and strengthen what we do on our own individual campuses. So I think there are opportunities that some of the national conversations can provide for us. So as we get started about discussing assessment reports, I wanted to first find out just a little bit about who you are. And so we just have a very generic kind of poll question that we're going to ask. And with these polls, you can only choose one option. And so you should be seeing that here in a moment.
Yep, I just put it up. How long have you been involved with higher education assessment? Less than 1 year, 2 to 4 years, 5 to 10 years, or more than 10 years? I love this question.
And it's always really nice to see, not that being involved in assessment a short time means you don't know as much as other people. Sometimes some of the most exciting ideas and perspectives come from people who have a new approach to what we've been doing for a while. And so, but it is interesting to see kind of where we fall out on all of that.
All right, let's take a look. 15% less than 1 year, 29% from 2 to 4 years, 30% from 5 to 10 years, and 25% for more than 10 years. It's a pretty good, pretty equally distributed there, pretty close.
A nice distribution there. You guys are good already. We've got we've got good things going on. So given that, and for those that have been involved only a couple of years, you haven't necessarily from the assessment side had the opportunity to go through the process of getting, evaluating, talking about annual assessment reports. You may have done them from the other perspective within a department or a program, but one of the things that assessment offices across the land do is to request annual assessment reports. And often our faculty are overjoyed and absolutely thrilled every year to realize that yet again they get to submit yet another report. And so we often look at these as kind of necessary evils, as things that can be done, and you know, many of us use software or have a particular template for these assessment reports to be submitted, and that can be really helpful because that way we don't have to look across multiple styles of narratives and we can pull information out very quickly. But often those templates in that process are designed because it makes it easier on the assessment office, not necessarily on the programs and the departments that are putting together these kinds of plans. We all know that that our different departments and programs across our own campuses have different cultures. And they use different terminology, and they talk about what assessment actually means or looks like in very different ways. If you're dealing with a science field of some kind, they think of assessment often as research. You know, maybe not empirical research, but they think of it in that way. Whereas when you look into the fine arts, they don't necessarily see it in the same way, and they don't use the same types of evidence. They may use more juries and more portfolios to look at what they're doing. So we have different cultures on our own campuses, and yet we often request that annual report to be in the same kind of format, regardless of the program or the department or the type of work that they're doing. On my own campus here at TCU, we have annual assessment reports that are due from our academic programs, from our student affairs programs. We have also a requirement for our administrative support for these kinds of documents. And what I have found is that our academic affairs, our departments and programs are usually pretty good about getting something submitted. Sometimes the quality might be a bit questionable on some of them, and some of them I know are using some cut and paste from year to year, which means they're not necessarily being very useful to the department. Our student affairs programs, again, also do a reasonably good job of getting those submitted. I have much more difficulty with some of the administrative areas, and a lot of that has to do not with the fact that they're not doing assessment, but because what they do is so very much focused on assessment that to try and put all of that into some kind of a template or a text box or a field becomes very complicated and very difficult. So we've had to kind of think about different ways of gathering information. So when we think about what is really the point of these types of assessment reports, certainly accountability is a big piece of that. I use those assessment reports as we prepare for our reaffirmation visits And so we use that for that reason. It is a wonderful documentation tool so that we can look back over time. I can go back and I can pull a mission statement or a set of learning outcomes from however many years ago our data go back. So that documentation can be very useful. And when we have changeovers in department chair, sometimes they will not always be very good at keeping records and passing those records on. And so we actually can document what they have done in terms of assessment for that purpose. So that can be very helpful. It is also a way of officially closing the loop, and I put that in quotes, and mostly because I don't necessarily think we're in a loop. I like to think of it more as a spiral, that we are actually improving, not just going over the same thing again and again. But it does give us that kind of end point where it is the end of the year, submit your data, submit your report, so that you are done, and we can then complete that checkbox, and our faculty chairs and other program administrators can be finished, go off for the summer with a clear conscience and know that they've done it, or a very guilty conscience because they haven't yet done that, and they will do it first thing when they come back in the fall, absolutely, for sure. So we get into this, doing it for these accountability kinds of reasons, and you notice in these 4 bullets, which of course is not every reason why we do this, but improving and enhancing learning is not necessarily front and center in this. It is a part of accountability. It is a part of closing the loop, most certainly. But often when we start focusing on these annual report forms, we are not focusing on our students and what they're learning and what they're showing, or what our faculty are doing that is new and different and engaging and cutting edge. Those things are not usually collected in the typical templates that we have. And so when we think about just the reports, we don't really get a whole bunch of interest from our faculty. I did have have kind of an open meeting one time that I invited people across campus to come to talk about the report format. And surprisingly enough, there was not a whole lot of interest in that. I had certain people who would email me and say, well, just don't do this and don't do that, but no one ever really came up with a plan for what to do and how to make that so that it was a helpful process. So these annual assessment reports don't really spark a whole lot of interest in the part of our faculty, our administration, our staff. It kind of is just something that we're going along, completing a checklist or a task. So what I wanted us to kind of think about today is what if these kinds of annual reports actually did spark interest? What if instead of thinking about this as a listing and a verification of things that were done just for that accountability reason, if instead we started to think more about that assessment report, that annual assessment report, as being more of maybe an announcement or a declaration of what was going to happen, maybe even a kickoff for a new strategy or a new improvement or a new structure or something like that. And so if we considered this annual assessment report as more of a framework that we use for moving forward, instead of a document that shows what we have done, then we might be able to change that conversation so that report is less of a report and more of a useful process that is certainly documented, that helps us to move forward. And if we do that, what we get then is, instead of completing a year, we begin a new year. And of course, that's what we mean when we say closing the loop. We don't mean we stop. We mean we finish, we gather our data, we make some decisions informed by that information that we have, so that we then move forward with potentially tweaks, new strategies, new curriculum design, modifications of some sort. So if we started a new year with that annual assessment report, what might that feel like? Would that be a helpful kind of thing? We know that when we get into December 31st, and everyone has New Year's events and parties, or we avoid New Year's events and parties at all costs, but they are certainly occurring and happening, and that is a significant time in our calendar year. I had a president one time who would actually, in August, have a New Year's party at his house. And so it was kind of, Happy New Year, and it was kind of neat to sort of think about it in that way. So what if we were to think about these annual assessment reports a little bit differently, that they actually were the start of something rather than the end of something? And so if we think about the purpose of assessment, why do we do what we do? Yes, of course, there is certainly that accountability piece, but assessment should contribute to better learning, to improve and enhance learning. Assessment should support practices in higher education that work. And assessment, as we often talk about, is a way to share our story, to talk about our programs, our colleges, our institutions, higher education in general. And in order to tell that story, we need to have good evidence and good information so that story makes some sense. And so assessment helps us to do that. Yes, we can provide evidence of learning and sometimes even evidence of improvement. And we are focusing attention on learning goals and outcomes rather than inputs. And so what assessment has done in the last 20, 30 years in higher education has been to help change the landscape a little bit, so that we are looking at what we expect students to learn, and we are looking at whether or not they are learning that. Now, we may not always be doing that well, and there are certainly many areas that we can work to improve that. But I think that is one of the things that assessment has truly helped us do, and I think that's an important thing. Many of you are on the Assess listserv and have seen all of the different conversations and posts that have gone on in response to some of this national conversation. And Linda Susky has worked with several people, and many of you have signed on to this, I know. This document that is now posted in a couple of different places, and I have the link up there. And you all will get copies of these PowerPoints. I've got several links embedded in here so that you can find these things. But in that, Linda and all the others who worked with her on this really talk about the idea of that we're assessing for very important reasons. And one is that students, faculty, co-curricular staff share responsibility for student learning, that institutional leaders need to make student learning a valued priority, and that when we do assessment, what we're doing is we're building on what faculty and staff are already doing well, and that when there are disappointing outcomes, these are seen as opportunities for improvement and can be addressed fairly, supportively, and compassionately. And so this helps to make the point that assessment is this process that we're going through where we are trying things and identifying things and looking for things, and that we are doing that in a way that really takes note of the context of the institution and what we've been doing. So assessment is this process, and we talk about it being a process, and yet we often end with this report, which is then what assessment becomes to many of our faculty and staff colleagues. It is that final document that is due. So if we think about the purpose of an annual assessment report, one of the things that is in there is to clarify the context of that program or that unit or that department. Most of our annual assessment plans have a place in there for the mission to be stated. Learning goals, learning outcomes are indicated in that, so that we can look at these different programs and understand the different approaches that they may take, the different areas, that disciplinary difference that we might see across campus. The annual assessment report is a place to present data and findings. And so these are crucial to all the kinds of things that we're looking at. If we're going to look for improvement and look for ways to find out what students are learning, we need to see what they're actually learning, so that we can identify what's working and identify those areas where there is a need for change. And of course, it provides that historical record that we can use if we have changeover in departments, if departments are looking to see some trends, and then certainly for showing our accreditors and others that we are marking these things, we are identifying these things, we are using this to improve and enhance the learning that we're doing. So this idea of an annual assessment report is a very important one, but let's think about it in some different ways. So some of you that may be in educational psychology may have heard of Dale's cone of experience, and sometimes this is stated as that we if we hear something, we only remember it 10% of the time, and if we actually do something with whatever it is that we're learning, we learn it much better. And so it's not enough to hear about it or write about it. We need to do more with that. And so that moving into an active participation with material can cause us to actually remember it, take ownership of it, and potentially act on it. And so if we can come up with ways for our faculty and staff to look at this annual assessment report as a more active discussion, kind of like that experiential learning approach, we may be able to use these reports as not just a static documentation, but as a stepping stone to move forward into doing some of these additional kinds of things. And so I think this is an important piece to remember, that just because somebody submits a report doesn't mean anyone else actually read it, and it doesn't mean that they even read the entire document. Many will just kind of pull up what was there from last year and make appropriate date changes and maybe not a whole lot else. So it doesn't become a learning opportunity for the program. So let's think of ways then that we might be able to use Dale's code of experience to move this into a more active kind of process. So if we move this to a beginning so that we can focus more on we can focus not really on this is what we did, but focus on this is what we will do. This becomes the beginning, that kickoff, that declaration, that celebration, that moving forward of things. And so the question comes up is, well, does this then have to be a written document, an actual report in the typical sense of the word? And I think the answer is yes and no, all at the same time. So I think that having that kind of written documentation is always going to be an important piece of that. We will need it for all kinds of the reasons that we've already discussed, that historical view, that trends analysis, and we need it to be able to show others what we have been doing. It's certainly in a part of accreditation. I don't see that as going away. And so I think that is still a very important thing. But does it only have to be a written document? And I think here is where we can use some of what the literature on engagement and active learning can show us. What if we included more focus on presentations or on posters? What if our faculty actually shared with other faculty and staff across campus what they were doing, what worked, what didn't work, why they made certain changes? Would that cause a different kind of dialogue around assessment than we have now? And I think the answer to that is most definitely yes. Perhaps there are, these kind of white papers that might be focusing not on the entire assessment report, but on a specific learning outcome or a learning goal that might be shared not just on campus, but perhaps beyond campus, where a particular program may be trying something new in terms of pedagogy that impacts student learning in very positive ways. Well, then these things should be shared and are being shared. Many of us are involved with the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning and getting our faculty engaged in that process as well. And I think that becomes incredibly powerful. I know on my own campuses, the faculty and staff who do that kind of work with the Scholarship of Teaching and Learning are much more engaged and involved in the assessment of their programs. And they are not only focused on submitting a report. And so that does change how they do this. I also think that we should seriously consider the idea of multi-year projects. Depending on the department or the program, they may have as few as 3, maybe 4 learning outcomes, or as many as who knows how many. I look at some of the programs with specialized accreditation, and they have 150 upwards of learning outcomes, and there is absolutely no way to focus on all of those learning outcomes within a given academic year or calendar year, or however we count that. There is no way to do that. So if we really want in-depth engagement with learning and looking at ways to modify and change, then we really should be looking at multi-year assessment projects. That gives faculty time to create something, implement that, actually have students go through that implementation process so that we can look to see, did this really have an impact on what the students have learned? Have they learned more, differently, or better? We can't do that within a single year. We can also look at other ways of doing this that might be focusing on cross-departmental projects. Maybe looking at a general education requirement or some other kind of interdisciplinary approach to what they're doing, so that perhaps there's a theme in any given year. Might be on critical thinking or problem solving or globalization or something like that. If many departments on campus and across campus were engaged in looking at that within their own program, we might have some fascinating kinds of results that we could look at that would absolutely go much further than any one particular program and probably any one particular campus. And so we're going to actually talk about some examples of these kinds of things that are happening, and I will share with you some links and some places to look at of these sorts of things that are happening. So, for example, in terms of some of the faculty or program presentations, the University of Florida has, for a couple of years now, had what started off as an internal assessment conference and still is mostly an internal assessment conference, but they will often bring in some people from the outside. I had the opportunity to go there year before last and talk with their faculty and staff, and then I was able to sit and watch several different program presentations about what they were doing and why they were doing it and what they gained from it and what they were changing as a result of that. And it was absolutely inspiring, very powerful. And they had faculty from across campus. And they also had students there who were talking about what they had gained from an assessment process that was usually embedded in a capstone course of some kind. So it became a very, very powerful a tool to use, and of course, those faculty and staff who were presenting are now some of the best models on campus for doing good assessment work, and so that was a wonderful thing. I've also seen that Grand Valley State University does an internal assessment conference, and that also has a lot of those very, very powerful pieces to it. And so anytime you can get faculty and staff to talk about what they have done and why they have done it, you're providing feedback and reinforcement to the faculty and the staff for the work that they're doing with program assessment, which makes them want to become more involved and engaged in the process. Many of our faculty and staff, probably most of our faculty and staff on our institutions, are intellectually curious, and they want to know why and what if and what happens when. And these are wonderful assessment questions that they can become incredibly engaged with, and we can all learn from the work that they're doing most definitely. One of the things that I think assessment offices can do to help support these kinds of initiatives is to provide resources of some kind. Perhaps that would be to fund travel to an off-campus assessment conference to present, or to go hear what some others are doing. But most certainly, some of the resources that we can do for this is to organize and plan the event. Find an internal venue to be able to do this. Get faculty, staff, and administration to attend and to listen and to watch and to learn from that process. So I think this is a potential opportunity that would add to just that written documentation that would come in with the annual report. And I think it can provide some really positive approaches to looking at things. As I mentioned before, with a multi-year project, we gain some advantages because it is impossible to assess everything every year and do it well. And so, unfortunately, what we often get from departments is very cursory looks at some of the learning outcomes, because to look at it in great depth takes a lot of time and a lot of energy that takes away from other things that our faculty and staff are doing that are absolutely crucial, like teaching and advising and doing service to the university and research and all of those things. So if we instead can try to focus on a smaller number of learning outcomes each year, and maybe even over a longer cycle, then we get some benefits that we can look for changes and trends over time. And we can look and try different iterations of a particular strategy to see what's happening and what is working with that. I encourage some of my departments on campus to look at these multi-year projects in different ways. So they may have some outcomes that are absolutely essential and they want to look at every single year, but perhaps it's not all of them. And so perhaps there's a way to cycle through some of those, even if you're not cycling through all of them. So I think there's a lot of flexibility that we can build into a process, looking at these kind of multi-year projects. And certainly, if we're looking at something that is across the university, like critical thinking, or something like that, trying to do that in a single year is just not a realistic thing to do. I wanted to point out something that DePaul University does. They have, in addition to the annual assessment reports, they have an academic program review. And as a piece of that academic program review, what they do is essentially ask the program or department to focus on something specific that they're interested in. So they actually are working on a project, and it is a multi-year project. And so they're able to go into much more depth in terms of what they're doing. And there are several very nice aspects of the academic program review that they do. And again, I've got the link there, so you can kind of take a look at what they're requesting and what their timeline and what their process is. But a lot of what this does is to take something that is within a department and raise it up so that others can also see what's happening. And because it's done in a way that really values the process, it can be very high quality work. And that's really what we want in assessment. We want high quality work. We want improvements to occur that are meaningful. While I know that many changes happen that are very small tweaks, and sometimes over time those can really add up and make a difference, what we don't often see discussed as part of the assessment story are these bigger impact changes that could happen more often if we looked at them over time and in more depth. There's also the idea of increasing dialogue with our faculty and staff. And one of the things that I have tried to do here at TCU a little bit is instead of asking our faculty and staff to create a report each time, I have with a few programs tried to kind of do this interview process where I actually have conversations during a faculty meeting to try and identify some of what they're doing, why they're doing it, what they're finding, why they think they're finding it, and what they might do differently. And so in the fall, having a conversation about what should or what do students learn from your program, and moving into, okay, so if this is what you want students to be able to do, how might you see it? What's already in your curriculum, and the potential assignments, and capstone experience and projects and things like that can help to identify already existing embedded measures. And then moving into perhaps spring or so, what did you find? What did the capstone projects look like, if there are findings available at that point? And then finally moving on to, okay, so given what you found and what you've talked about, what are you going to do with that? Was it, was it surprising? What was surprising about it? Does that are you thinking that you might change anything? If so, what would that be? And so if you can facilitate that dialogue within a program or department, you can often get some very exciting conversations that lead to some real substantive changes that truly do make a difference. And we know that our faculty and staff are already doing these kinds of things. We know that they're having these conversations, but often they are not being documented. And so they fall out of any kind of assessment discussion, not because our programs aren't doing assessment and learning from that assessment and making changes based on that assessment, but because we are not documenting them, and so unless we happen to be there, we lose that information. It goes away, even though it had an impact, and so we can't use that as an assessment part of that story. And so what I think this does is also allows us more opportunity to think about institution-wide assessment, looking at general education, looking at these learning goals that we have. Many of you I know are using some of AAC&U's value rubrics to look at some of these areas. Imagine what it would look like if we use those across several departments. And I know some of you are doing that, and that can be really exciting because you're pulling things across disciplines and you're talking about things that are specific to your institutional mission, and engaging faculty, staff, and students in that process. And I think that can really be exciting. Washington State University, and again, there's their link, and they have a list of their core learning outcomes. One of them is critical and creative thinking, and so they actually are able to ask each department to look at these things, or each program to look at these things in a variety of ways, and they roll up some of that data from department to department so that they can actually look at that as an institution. And once they're able to see that as an institution, it becomes much more valuable to having that conversation about what is truly happening. And so they aren't just submitting these annual assessment reports online. They're doing more than that because they've got an institutional system in place that allows for that further conversation. And I think that becomes a very valuable way to do this. So I think there's a lot of different things that we can look at to move beyond just that annual assessment report that is submitted and goes into that, that black hole and that, that dusty file cabinet, or whatever analogy that you want to actually use. I know that for so many faculty and staff across our campuses, one of the most frustrating things for them is that they put time and effort into a report, and they submit it, and then they hear nothing. And they don't know whether it actually was submitted. Did anyone read it? Was it good enough? Was it not good enough? Did it, and you do that for a few years, and you get very little enthusiasm for submitting those reports. So I think there are so many things that we can do that will help us to truly identify what our data are that we want to use to tell our story. And we can do that in a much more meaningful way if we don't try and look at everything all the time. Instead, we focus on things that will be important and really make a difference. So I wanted to share with you all a few of my favorite kind of assessment quotes, and I hope you laugh at some of these. So everyone, nobody notices it when your zipper is up, but everyone notices when it's down. And so when we're doing things on campus that are working, we tend to not really pay much attention to those things that are working. It's only when something doesn't work that we get attention, and often that attention is not positive attention. So what is it that we might be able to do to look at these things and acknowledge the good things and make sure that we reward and keep these good things, while also looking for the times when things are not so good, so that we can hopefully identify those early and really focus on what we want students to do, which is to enhance their learning. And so Tom Angelo's quote that many of you have heard before, the accountability matters, learning still matters most. And I think that in the assessment world, when we get all wrapped up in documentation and accountability and trying to ensure that we're getting the right forms and the right reports in the right order, we cannot ever forget that we are here for a primary purpose, and that is the learning of our students. And so no matter what, that matters most. And I think that Tom has focused on this over the years, and I think it is absolutely crucial that we do that and always keep that first and foremost in our minds. Asimov's statement that education is not something you can finish. We're never done. We're never done with assessment. And I had one faculty member tell me that assessment seems to be this never-ending cycle, and he did not say that in a positive way, but he was right. Assessment doesn't end. Learning doesn't end. Education doesn't end. It continues on. And so we should be thinking of our assessment documentation systems as these spirals or these things that lead to the next. And so that static report doesn't always help us do that. Well, it very rarely helps us do that unless we add something else to it where we're able to show that this moves us to this next step, which will move us then again forward as we continue to grow and enhance what we're doing. So I do think that these annual assessment reports that we require, and we require them for some very good reasons, give us this opportunity to look at them as more than just a checkbox or a checklist. This is a chance for us to really engage our campuses in the conversations about learning and see what worked and do more of that, and what didn't work. Let's identify those and change it and see if the change works. And if it doesn't, what else can we do, and how else can we modify that, so that we become these learning organizations that Bar and Tag would talk about. And we want to always be continuously learning and improving and growing, just the same way we want our students to do. We want to be able to do that as an institution. So we really can use this as a fantastic opportunity for increased learning and better assessment that will actually allow us to better tell our stories, so that we know that we are making a difference and improving what's going on. So at this point, we've got a few minutes left. And so, Amber, have there been any questions or thoughts or comments that have come in during this process?
Yes, there have. That was, I really enjoyed all of that. It was motivational, and also I giggled several times. So it's a good thing I was muted, which is, again, something I really like about your presentation. So thank you so much, Catherine. We do have some questions. Let me take control of the screen back, and I will share those with everybody. Okay, hopefully you guys can see the Q&A that I have up here. So the first question, can you see it too, Catherine?
I can.
Oh, great. I think that's very helpful for everybody. How would you handle a situation where faculty and staff are resistant to sharing their results, especially if they are not favorable?
Well, and so I think this comes down often to a question of trust and a feeling of respect. So if a department or a cohort of faculty within a department or a program do not want to share their results, often that's because they feel that if they share their results, then things will happen to them that are not necessarily positive, that sometimes these results can be used in ways to shut down programs, to cut funding for programs, and so we end up only wanting to share the good things because we have to, and not truly be transparent about what's happening. And so in those kinds of situations, I think there are several things. One is to find out why is that happening, and if it's a trust issue, are there things that can be addressed or changed? And sometimes that is very difficult if there is a particular dean or a particular, in the leadership somewhere that there has been instances where these data were not used to help a department. That can be very difficult to change. And so working, I think, with the department and those faculty to identify where that is a first step. And then sometimes perhaps allowing for at least aspects of that to not necessarily go public, whatever public means, whether that's public within the institution or beyond. To give some of the faculty some control over which parts are going to be shared and which parts are not going to be shared. So sometimes having that ongoing relationship with the departments can help to overcome some of that. I'd also encourage you to consider creating a campus-wide assessment committee made up of faculty, so that that the faculty and staff can have more of a voice at the table. And then by including faculty who might be a little bit resistant to that might be a way of changing some of that resistance, because they have some control over what happens. I will say that does not always work. I've certainly seen institutions where that simply is not something that there's almost nothing you can do to handle that. But on the whole, I think building relationships with departments, trying to establish that trust, and giving faculty more of a voice and a control over what happens to their data can help with that.
That was a good answer. I think I know the answer to this one, but would it be possible to share a copy of your slides with everybody?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
I have those, so we'll either send them out with the recording, or on the recording page there'll be an option to download them. What changes have you noticed after implementing this shift of how one looks at annual reports?
So one of the things that has happened with some departments, and with the interviewing, and this has not been widespread, partly because it is quite a bit more time consuming. But one of the things that I've seen is that more faculty actually are getting involved and engaged within those particular departments. Because it's now part of a process. It's not just this document that gets submitted. So more of the faculty are having those conversations. So what I've seen then across campus is, if I hold a workshop on identifying measures or creating rubrics, I actually have more people show up. More of our junior faculty who are now getting more engaged and involved in that process. So I think it actually begins to change a little bit of the mindset about assessment, so that we want to know more. We want to get better data. We want to try and change how we're looking at that. So we've gone through some strategic planning here at TCU, and one of the things that we realized across campus, certainly there are several of us who have known this for quite some time, was that we do not do a very good job of gathering and understanding and looking at our data across campus. And we have long wanted a data warehouse. Our institutional research office has been asking for that for years and years, and it has never been part of the budget. Well, now that we're looking at strategic planning, and now that we're having calls for data that we cannot respond to very well because we don't have this data warehouse, it is looking very promising that we will get a data warehouse that we'll be able to start using. So I've really noticed people actually wanting data and information and wanting to get more ways to gather those kinds of data. So it can really, I think, change the conversation on campus.
Mm-hmm. The next two are a little bit related to that as well, I feel like. Would you recommend using a template for these kinds of reports, and what would you include? And then I think the other one's a little bit related, or do you find faculty and staff to be more open to the interview method?
Well, and I think both of these can work really well. So even with that interview method, I still create a document that I then give to them so that they can make sure that it's appropriate and accurate, and it's still theirs, even though I'm kind of the interpreter of it. So we still put that into the documentation process. So there is still essentially kind of a template even with that interview process. I have found faculty and staff to be very open to the interview method. The biggest problem we have, and this will come as no surprise to anyone, is trying to schedule that and trying to get time on during a regular faculty meeting of the department to take some of the time for those kinds of discussions. So I think that's I think that is an ongoing issue that we all face. Is just simply finding the time to do that. But I think that having some kind of a template, even if it's a flexible one, can still be helpful. If I put my other hat on, I'm often will be part of a SAC-COC reaffirmation committee, and I know when I visit other campuses and look at other campuses, IE sections, if there is some kind of a template, it does make it a lot easier to make sense of it from the outside. So I think templates can help, but I think that sometimes we get a little bit overly rigid with some of our templates.
How does the WSU facilitate discussions of the college-wide data that you referenced earlier? Given that it's aggregate data, how can the information be used so that it's actionable? Do departments compare their own outcomes with college-wide results?
And I do not know the answer to that question.
I kind of thought you might not, but
one of the things that I can see by looking at what they have on their website, I'm sure that departments are comparing their own outcomes to the college-wide results. I know that as a department chair, I would most certainly be doing that and looking to improve. So I think that there are all that you can. I would imagine that they would have to be facilitating those conversations in some way, and I bet even if they didn't facilitate them, they'd still happen because we all like to look and see how we compare to others.
Do you have any thoughts on awards or monetary incentives for assessment work?
Oh, I have all kinds of thoughts on that. Yes. I think we should, provide lots of resources and monetary incentives and all those kinds of things. Unfortunately, we usually can't. I have tried to recognize that doing this kind of work is sometimes new for some of our faculty and staff. This is not something they necessarily trained in how to do as a graduate school. And so I try to provide some kind of reason to do this. And sometimes what that incentive really is, you get your data back and you get to see it and you get to know more about your own programs. I have often tried to take faculty when I can to conferences. I've brought groups of faculty to SACS. I've brought groups of faculty to AAC&U. And so I try and help that incentive be something that they actually get back. They gain something, whether that's in scholarship or in being able to share their work with others and receive the good feelings that come with that. We have never been able to provide a lot of a monetary incentive. I've tried a few times to do that, and in all honesty, I think that, and I think we should continue to try to do that. I think we value what we pay for, and so I think that is crucial and important. But I also am very aware of not wanting to trivialize something if we can't offer, larger monetary kinds of things. I can't offer a course release necessarily, but I have provided, book money. We'll buy you some books for your library in your department or what have you. I've tried to provide other kinds of things. So I think we should be very aware of how we're rewarding that, recognizing that we can't always just hand out, dollars to people. And even if we could, it probably wouldn't be enough to really pay for their time. So can we write thank you notes? Can we copy the provost or the president on a thank you email? Are there other ways that we can show how much we value that work?
And we are actually to the top of the hour. Would it be okay if I sent those last two questions to you offline to get answers to those? Are you okay with that, Catherine?
Absolutely, sure.
Okay. Yeah. There's been lots of thank yous, lots of comments. Everybody loved it. Thank you so much for presenting for all of us today. I'm going to just talk really briefly about Weave. If you liked this webinar, we have a lot of other ones that you might be interested in. Just a little bit about Weave. We were created at Virginia Commonwealth University in 2003 to help streamline their assessment and accreditation. We have been a company since 2006 and have helped over 500 institutions in 52 countries with their assessment and accreditation needs. And one of the ways that we do that for everybody, even if they're not a member, is providing webinars like this. Weave is actually an acronym for the assessment process, if you were wondering where that came from. So this is very entrenched in everything that we do. We even do it with the webinars, which is why I'll mention that survey just one more time. If you could give us your feedback, we'd really appreciate it so that we can continue to fine-tune this webinar series. A little bit about the platform, if this is something that you are interested in learning more about. We have several options for people, but really what we're trying to do is make this very complex work more simple. I know that sounds counterintuitive, but that's really our goal, and also really flexible, so that if you do something specific at your institution, we want to help you keep doing that, but in an easier way. If you want more information, either about our webinars or about us, our website is weaveeducation.com. We've got just about everything on here that you'd like to know. If you're attending the webinar today, you'd probably be the most interested in the resources area. Here we have recordings of all of our prior webinars, and this one will appear there as well. I did record it, and so you'll be able to watch it. I'll send a link to your email, and it'll take you exactly where you need to be. But in the meantime, you can scroll through some of these. We also have checklists, guides, handouts, all kinds of different things here. We really want to support this community. Most of us actually here at the company have come from institutions and have done this work, and so we see you as our colleagues, and part of our mission is to really help support you in everything that you do. So please feel free to visit the website. You can always email me. My email is amber@weaveeducation.com, and I can actually put that up here as well. And Catherine, thank you again so much for this presentation. Everybody really enjoyed it. I learned a lot, and as always, it was a pleasure to hear you speak. And I will send those other 2 questions over, and if anybody has any others, just let me know. But thank you so much for your time today, Catherine, and everybody who attended. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Have a great week, everybody.